Okay, folks, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to our first Stanford Program in Law, Science and Technology Speaker Series event in 2023. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Jan Trzaskowski. He's a well-renowned IT law expert from Europe, a law professor at Copenhagen Business School and Aalborg University. And he has been researching IT law and consumer protection law, and especially privacy and data protection law for over 20 years. He also served as the head of the Danish delegation negotiating the 2000 e-commerce directive, and is also the founder of an organization called Business and Democracy, the Business and Democracy Initiative by them. The title of his talk today is Your Privacy is Important to Us, Restoring Human Dignity in Data-Driven Marketing. And of course, privacy has been of interest to law profs for a very long time, but in more recent years, I feel like sort of the general public has awoken to the importance of privacy and data protection. And so it's wonderful to have one of the leading experts on privacy here with us. And yeah, just this event is also co-sponsored with our Transatlantic Technology Law Forum, as well as the Stanford Law School Center for the Digital Economy. So please join me in welcoming Professor Trzaskowski. Over to you.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me over again. I will keep this speech to about 30 minutes, so we will have time for discussion. So I'm going to start my watch here and see if I can finish in time. So I've been working with technology law for many years, and in the last about 12, 14 years, I've been interested in psychology. So I've worked with marketing law, and I've been curious about how can psychology inform marketing law. And that I have expanded into the area of data-driven marketing as well. So what I'm discussing today is a certain kind of business model based on advertising, on marketing. So if you have a platform, you have advertising space, you're reselling it, you're reselling the attention of your users. There's nothing new in that. That's been around for about 100 years. So what you would be interested in if you have a platform or website that relies on reselling people's attention, you want to have more users. You want the users to spend more time on your site. And you want to know much more about each individual so you can sell the same advertising space at a higher price. Okay? So that is the gist of your incentive if you have a data-driven marketing model. And that also means that you will use psychological tricks and so on to get people in a direction where they will spend more time on their screens or on your services, and you will try to get as much information out of them. I should also say to begin with that I'm not against technology. I'm pro-technology. But as Kranzberg, a historian pronouncing his first law of technology, is that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. So it's not technology that may be the problem, but the business model behind. Okay, so before we start, just think about you sitting in a cafe. There's a couple next to you. They're obviously on the first date. They're obviously interested in each other. One of them goes to the bathroom. What does the other one do? Check their phones. What about the person that goes to the bathroom? Things like that I'm curious about. I mean, you all know the answer. So the question you could also ask, what did we do 20 years ago, 25 years ago? We would take out a cigarette, right? Not everybody, but a lot of people take out a cigarette. So the question we could think about today is, what is more dangerous? Cigarettes or smartphones? Okay? I know what I think, and we can talk about it later on, but just think about it. Good questions are really good to have. Okay, so as I said, the presentation is based on my book that came out about 1 year ago, and it's dealing with the combination of marketing law and data protection law. And just to set the scene, we can have the European Data Protection Supervisor from 2015 The supervisor here is advising the European institutions on data protection law. And they said, you know, we can't uncritically import the data-driven business models that rely on surveillance. We have to search for other options. And we haven't got that far yet, but we are getting there. Just to understand how the EU, I speak from an EU perspective, but we can discuss issues pertaining to the US as well, to show how the Court of Justice of the European Union thinks about privacy. So this case here is part of 5 or 6 cases now on data retention. So basically what these cases are saying is that governments should not have access to the telecom data that telecom operators are storing. They need it for billing purposes, right? And the government wants to have access to it to fight serious crime. But they can't do that. They can't get access to all the information. They can do it in concrete situations, but not get access to all the information, because this is very important information. There's a serious impact on the privacy of individuals. So the question again here we could ask ourselves is, if you think about the Googles and the Facebooks and so on, do they have more or less data than the telecom operators? Probably more, yeah, slightly more, right? So what about the purpose of fighting serious crime versus the purpose of marketing? Right? Which one is more important? Well, it's up for discussion, of course, but that's just a good way of thinking about this. Okay, so to kick off the general data protection regulation, which most of you probably have heard of, some of you might know it pretty well. I try to distill it into 6 fundamental principles to be able to present in a couple of minutes, as I will do right now. So the GDPR, if you take it, look at the data controller, the one that determines the purpose and the means. So when we're talking about data-driven marketing, it's the one that determines, I want to collect data for marketing purposes, to personalize marketing. You have to ensure legitimacy. You need to have a legal basis. It could be consent, but it can also be something called contractual necessity, which I will come back to. But you have to legitimize what you're doing. We also need to have transparency. We need to have transparency when you're when you're consenting to your data being processed. You need to have information about information being processed and so on. And then we have the principle of security, which is paramount if you think about what is at stake when companies have large amounts of personal data. So that is the obligations for the data controller. And they need to do this to be accountable towards authorities. So we have a principle of accountability, which is a key concept within GDPR. It's not sufficient that you comply with the rule, you should be able to demonstrate that you're in compliance with the rules. And towards the data subject, you have to empower the data subject, including by means of consent. So consent means that the user can withdraw his consent. And all of this is circled in a proportionality principle, which is very common and widespread in EU law. So of course we have to consider what is the privacy impact. And the higher the privacy impact, the more seriously you have to take legitimacy, transparency, security, and so on. So in that sense, it's a proportionate, everything is, you have to consider the proportionate to the possible infringement. I hope this makes sense. So if we look at markets, so markets are run by supply and demand, nothing new in that. And what is important to realize when we're talking about market is that marketing is important. Okay? We cannot just prohibit marketing because it makes us buy things that we don't need, which it does. Because marketing is important for companies to inform the individuals, the consumers, about their products. So the consumers can make rational choices. And rational choices here being choices that match our goals, values, and preferences as individuals. So I may have a preference for a Lenovo computer, some might have a preference for a Mac computer, and so on. But as long as we are able to fulfill our goals, values, and preferences, you know, we're doing rational. So that is the rationality we're talking about. So if you're looking at marketing law, it's regulating a market failure. So that the business has an incentive to, you can say, lie as much as possible and as they can get away with. And consumers have an interest in getting correct information and at least not misleading information. So it's regulating a market failure. So in marketing law, marketing is the rule. That's the starting point. Of course you can do marketing, but we need to have the absence of unfairness. And if you compare that to data protection law, which is a fundamental right, the starting point is that processing of personal data is an exception. So you need to legitimize that you're processing the data, and that requires fairness. And the absence of unfairness is not the same as fairness. As legal scholars, you know what this is about. This is a significant difference. So what we have shared between marketing law and data protection law is a principle of empowerment. So the consumer should be in charge of fulfilling their goals, values, and preferences. They should be empowered to withdraw consent, for instance, object to processing. It should be transparent. Both the marketing law and data protection law and the principle of proportionality is also visible in both marketing law and data protection law. So they have a lot of things in common. Okay. So if we look into empowerment, which again is key in understanding data protection law and marketing law, I've come to the conclusion that if we want to talk meaningfully about empowerment, first of all, we need to have agency, an idea that we are actually free individuals. We need to have transparency. We need to understand what's going on, and we need the absence of manipulation, because when we are being manipulated, we don't really have agency and we are not being empowered. So if we look into agency, we usually talk in fundamental rights on the right to self-determination, that we should be free to make choices. I don't know if you're familiar with Viktor Frankl. He wrote a wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning. I can recommend it to everybody. One of his points is there that where we live as human beings is in the area between you're being stimulated and you respond to it, right? So there is a room between stimulus and response. And the wider that can be, the more you're living, the more you are in Zen or whatever flow, right? Does that make sense? So that's where we live. And then the question we could ask ourselves, is that area getting wider or narrower with technology? That's something we can think about. Do we actually live more, or are we just responding more than we did before? So in economic theory, we talk about rational choice theory. So when you buy something, we, that is the economists, just assume that that is reflecting our preferences. We reveal our preferences in what we do. But if you look into psychology, we know that we have what is called bounded rationality and bounded willpower. That means that we have rationality to a limited amount. We have a limited amount of willpower. You probably heard about the marshmallows test and so on. We speak about ego depletion. So the more decisions you have to make, the more your brain will get tired, the worse decisions you will make, or you will just skip decisions. Just think about cookie consent, right? We don't think about it. Even the economists speak about rational apathy. So it's a rational strategy not to read, for instance, the terms of service. Because it's not like if you want to be with Facebook. I'm the generation Facebook. I know you're not anybody's using it. But if you want to sign on to Facebook, it's not like you're going to send an email to Mark and say, I like to be part of your call here, but section so-and-so of the contract I don't really like. You can't change anything, and all your friends are there, or Instagram, or wherever they are. So you have to go there. So it's a rational strategy not to read the information. So can we speak about agency? We can discuss that. When it's required to go to university or to school that you're on these social media, is it then your free will that you exercise? When we are talking about transparency, I'll come back to that a little bit later, but it's important to understand that information is not the same as transparency. So transparency is the goal. Transparency is the aim. Think of a window. A window is transparent. You can look through it and you can see what is going on in the machinery, right? So that's the idea. Information is what gets you closer to transparency. But as you have to read information, you have to understand, so you need to use time and cognitive power to understand the information. So it makes sense for you. You can't get real transparency, but you can get closer to it. That is what I call translucency. So when you look at a business model or you look at a translucent window, you have a good understanding of what's going on behind it. You might not know all the details, but it reflects very much what's going on, is what you expect and what you see. When it comes to manipulation, so the absence of manipulation, what is manipulation? So I borrowed this definition from Sunstein, and he defined it as sufficiently engage or appeal to the user's capacity for reflection and deliberation. And sufficiently here, which is in italics, is meant to have some flexibility to it. But basically, if you talk about manipulation, that is when you don't engage or appeal to the user's capacity for reflection. I think it's a useful definition. I mean, it doesn't have the precision that we would like to have, but that is also difficult to obtain. But sufficiently here will do the trick. Choice architecture. We all know that architecture is forming how we behave. If I have to leave this room, I will probably go out this door because there's too much friction of going that way, right? So we take the easy steps or the easy ways, right? So that is how friction works. So if you have a cookie consent banner, for instance, and you have a choice between OK and manage preferences, you know if you click manage preferences, you will spend much more time and therefore you will be more likely to click OK. So that is when we talk about online choice architecture, which plays a huge role in how we behave. And B.J. Fogg has, who you might know, he's from here. He's written a wonderful book back in 2004 about how you can use technology to persuade people and to make people do what you want to do. But it's not different from any physical architecture as well. We have nudges, Sunstein and Richard Thaler's book on nudging. How can you make nudges, small design features that will make one choice rather than something else. So you'll choose the fresh fruit that is in front of you and not the unhealthy fruit that is further behind and so on. It's basically friction again. B.J. Fogg, in his newest book, speaks a lot about prompts, how important prompts is. So basically he says that nothing happens if you don't prompt people. That is why a pop-up is so powerful, because you will be inclined to make a choice. You just think about how many times you're being prompted. If you meet somebody in the street that is asking you, would you do this or that, you feel compelled to do something, right? So prompts are extraordinarily important in understanding how we behave. So this is a real case. Some of you might know about it. It's from the Court of Justice of the European Union. It's called Planet 49. It was usually, people see it as a prohibition of having pre-checked boxes. So in the old days, so a few years ago, these would be pre-checked, right? You remember that. Now they are not, they are unchecked. But what is wrong with this picture here? Yeah?
Allow all is much easier to see than allow selection.
Exactly. So that is the design. That is how you can use choice architecture to make people click allow all. So actually it was worse in the old days because some people would unclick all these and then click allow all, right? Now they will just click, oh, that's okay, and then allow all. Okay, so if you look into paragraph 55 of the judgment, what it says there in essence is that it would appear, that is, if you have a pre-check box, it would appear impossible in practice to ascertain objectively whether consent is given. And my question here is, what if you use the same case to say, what if some people are just clicking this box where the preference is really for not having marketing cookies and so on, but they click here? Then they're not in compliance with their goals, values, and preferences. And you cannot objectively ascertain whether consent is given because of the design. So that is a way of interpreting this judgment in a way that you would say that this does not constitute consent. So we still need to see more case law on it, but I think that is an okay understanding of it. So that is data protection law. So if you use choice architecture to lure people into do things they shouldn't do, or they don't, it's not in accordance with their preferences, you might not get the consent that you're trying to obtain. If you look into marketing law, in Europe we have the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive that deals with marketing. And there we have a principle of undue influence under aggressive commercial practices. That is where you exploit a position of power. You design the infrastructure. And you do it in a way where the freedom of choice is significantly impaired, or the thinking has been confused. So this is an approach to the same issue of the pop-up to say it could actually be an aggressive commercial practice. So that means that you have both data protection law and marketing law dealing with the same issue. You could actually, I argue that in the book, you could make the argument that even if you have a pop-up that is coming up, it follows from the GDPR that it should be as easy to withdraw your consent as to give it. So if you have a pop-up the first time you come to a website, that's a prompt. That means that next time you come to the same website, you should get a prompt saying, last time you consented to this. Are you still in agreement with that, or you want to withdraw it? That is making it as easy to withdraw your consent as not. So this is an argument against cookie consent banners as they are. Okay? So we have to see a lot of case law from the European Union. Okay, so data protection law, marketing law. Dark patterns, you probably heard about it. And I've just written it once in my book because I think it's a really bad term. Okay? And explain why. There's some good sides to it also. So you have it here in the California Consumer Privacy Act and the Colorado Privacy Act. We have a definition of dark patterns. The reason why I'm a little bit against it is that what it does, it speaks about manipulation and user autonomy and so on. But from a legal perspective, it doesn't help us because there's no clarity. So what we are looking at is what is legitimate persuasion and what is illegal manipulation. That is what we're curious about, in both data protection law and marketing law, and this doesn't help us. It doesn't bring us further. The only thing it says, which might be an important point, is that you can use the design, you can use the choice architecture to manipulate. We also have something in the EU Digital Services Act, which you might have heard about. It's been laid out as being a cure-all. When we talk about dark patterns, you can say that it only deals with online platforms. And it does not deal with practices covered by the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive or the General Data Protection Directive. Both of these two pieces of legislation are extraordinarily broad. So you have to look very hard to find something in this realm that is not excluded. I don't know what's going on. But I think we had some pretty good lobbyists there helping the politicians make this rule or this exception. Okay, so congratulations with that. I just prefer, instead of dark patterns, manipulation by design of choice architecture. Because manipulation we have one definition of, we don't need another definition, and choice architecture is the neutral form. It can be used for good and bad. And we actually have two very recent cases from 19 December. They're not related at all, but they're from the same day. So we have Microsoft Bing from the French authorities, data protection authorities, being fined for making it more difficult to refuse cookies than accepting them. We have the new one from the Federal Trade Commission on using default settings, infringing on privacy, and using deceptive interfaces or dark patterns to make people do in-game purchasing. Right. So we have legislation before we got these two sets. So the question is, if we are getting new legislation in here, will we get more clarity that the companies will have an opportunity to interpret as they see fit until we will get case law? So maybe we're shooting ourselves in the foot, especially in the EU, on this topic. So if I want to say something good about dark patterns, it has created a lot of awareness and education. So now we can just talk about, oh, there's a dark pattern, you know, look for dark patterns and so on. So it has spurred a conversation that we very much need. For enforcement, for compliance, taxonomies on dark patterns may actually be helpful. So there are good things in dark patterns, but I don't really see them contributing significantly to marketing law or data protection law, especially from an EU perspective. Okay, so information. In order to obtain consent, because it's not like you can't obtain consent, we need to have transparency. And to illustrate why transparency is so difficult, I have made this model of a three-tiered model of information asymmetry. So the first tier is the good old Akerlof idea of the seller knowing much more about the product. And the way to level that is that you oblige the seller to reveal what he knows about the product, right? And then the consumer is informed, and you have leveled information asymmetry. That's easy to do with information. But tier 2, that is all how you're using behavioral sciences, how you're using persuasive technology, what B.J. Fox had talked about. How do you use that in your business? How will you inform people about that? And tier 3 is when you have personal data. So I know each of you and I know how to manipulate you. I can build a persuasion profile. I know at what time a day and with which means that particular individual should be pushed or nudged to do whatever I want them to do. So these are the 3 tiers. And if we're talking leveling information asymmetry, it's easy for tier 1, but for tier 2 and tier 3, it is pretty difficult. Imagine you writing on the website, just be aware that when you enter this website, we will manipulate you and try to get as much money out of you as possible. And we do these tips and these tricks to do that. It's very difficult to inform about that. And the storytelling that is being used is that we're doing it to improve your user experience. So we're framing it as something good. You know, you get cookies. You know, cookies are good for you. We make a little picture of a cookie, right? No, they're not good for you. Right? So that is framing and storytelling, which is extraordinarily powerful when we are talking about communication. We can talk more about that afterwards. But then you could ask, didn't we have that before? So if I go into a car dealership and say, you know, I'm looking for a car, you know, the salespersons in there, they will read me immediately. They will know who I am. They know how to talk to me to convince me to buy the model that he's earning the most money on, right? The difference, of course, is the scale, scope, and precision of predictions. That is different because usually the salesman has to, you know, talk to me for a little bit to, you know, understand which buttons to push. But when you go online, they know what you did on Facebook 20 years ago, right? 15 years ago. But the big difference is that normally it's the consumer that takes the decision to go into the car dealership. Okay, I'm prey, you know, just hit me, you know, I'll buy a car, right? But when you go online, the starting point is that you will be under surveillance and been that for the last 10 or 20 or more years. Wouldn't it be great if we had a principle like privacy by default? And that's a joke for those who knows the GDPR, because Article 25 of the GDPR actually has a principle of privacy by design and default, right? Shouldn't we take it seriously? I don't know. Okay, so we have been convinced that we are paying with personal data. We'll come back to that, but I argue that that is a very misleading way of thinking about that. But of course we also pay with personal data, because when we go on a website, you know, we have shown certain advertising, and some people will pay that, will buy the products there. I have a dialogue in the book. I've probably asked more than 1,000 students about, you know, who pays for Facebook, and the first answer I always get is, "Oh, we pay with our data. We pay with our data. I'm the clever one." Well, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg can't buy bread, right? With personal data, you take a USB stick and put it. You know, I like some bread, right? No, somebody else is paying for it. Oh, the advertisers are paying. Okay, so who's paying the advertisers? Oh, those who buys the product. Oh, could that be you? Yeah, maybe it could be me. Okay, so we are actually paying with real money when we are using these services. Okay, so what I'm aiming at or for with the book and of course also this talk is that we should try to understand the deal. What is the deal? How can we get transparency? And if you look into Article 22 of the GDPR, I think it has a pretty good model. It's on automated decisions. But there it defines transparency as you should understand the significance and envisage consequences. That's a high standard of transparency if you take it seriously. The Planet 49 case I mentioned before actually says that you should give information so the user can comprehend the functioning of cookies. And if that goes beyond that, it's just a piece of text put on your computer. If it's how it actually works, you know, who gets access to it, how it tracks me, and so on, you know, that will be people will have a hard time explaining that in a meaningful way to the average user, okay? We need to have a popular understanding of data-driven business models. So how many in here have more than 500 friends on social media? Probably most of you. Some of you might have more than 1,000. Okay, so how many of those people do you expect to see before you die? Okay, those you don't expect to see before you die, why are you saying happy birthday? I mean, why do you do it? Everybody knows that you've just been prompted to do that by the computer. Oh, your friend has a birthday. Okay, happy birthday, right? Why do you do that? So one thing we should understand with technology, and here I refer Postman, one of my favorite quotes of all times, is that what we should know, and this is from the 70s, what we should know about technology is everything we should know about cars. It's not how we use them, but how they use us. Right? We should understand how technology is using us. That's what we need to understand. So if you look at Dunbar, Robin Dunbar made comparison and correlations between the brain sizes of primates and their groups. And we would fit in there with a group of around 148 people. So that would be the normal group size for human beings. But due to technology, it can augment our possibility or ability to have 1,000 friends, far beyond the Dunbar number. But the question we should ask ourselves is, what are we paying? What is the downside? And that is, of course, that we become addicted to this technology. We become dependent on this technology, just like we're dependent on our GPS and a lot of other technologies. So what I want us to think about is, what is the cost? Because all the benefits are obvious, but the costs are often hidden and not told to us. So we should understand what is going on. So let's just, I see the time is almost up. So if you go back to the people on the cafe, for instance, you know, that is an addiction, right? We're getting addicted to our technology. We have to deal with that. So that is one of the prices we are paying with that. So if you look at the story, we should understand the externalities. So what are the consequences of this? So there are personal consequences. The fact that we become addicted to technology. It has social consequences. Our ability, our capability for empathy is going down because we are not used to seeing people face to face, trying to read their emotions, look them in their eyes and so on. We are getting worse at social skills. And we also have societal consequences. So we have loneliness, we have addictions, and we have elections. You know, because we're not talking only about commercial marketing, we also talk about political marketing, religious marketing, right? That's where it becomes dangerous for society. And then coming back to the people that smoke there. You know, when you were taking a cigarette, it is unhealthy. I'm not praising smoking at all, and if anybody, if you do it, try to quit. But you would keep your brain, you would keep your attention. You could smoke a cigarette and have a conversation. You could think and you could have your attention, right? If you have the smartphone, it will take all your attention and it will make you dumber. And even if you're not using it, because you can say, oh, there's secondhand smoke. Well, there's secondhand social mediaing, right? Because everybody around you gets dumber and dumber. You know, it's threatening our democracy because we need people to understand what's going on. So even if you're not on TikTok, even if you're not on social media, you are still at risk because you live in a society where people are actually getting dumber and dumber, and we need people to be cleverer and more clever. So some of the storytelling we should try to reframe is, as it is now, when we talk about free is actually often a very expensive model for the user, but it looks compelling, right? So we should understand that free actually means expensive. Smart basically means surveillance and behavior modification. And freedom, oh, we should be free to choose. Well, it means cognitive overload because your freedom depends on you, first of all, identifying your individual goals, values, and preferences, and try to understand what the businesses, for instance, are doing with it. So what are we paying with? Well, we're paying with attention. We're paying with personal data, we're paying with real money, but we are paying also with attention, and we are paying with agency. We are allowing others to manipulate us, to persuade us to do certain things. So we are paying with agency and attention, which are extraordinarily important resources for us as individuals. Some of the most important, coming back to Viktor Frankl, you know, that is where we have our attention, that is how we live our life. So if you want to have a good life, you should hold on to your attention and use it meaningfully. I have one slide on what to do, but I think my time is up. I mean, I've restrained myself, but I would like to have a discussion. Maybe I should just mention this recent from 4th of January. So we actually got a decision from the Irish authorities saying that Facebook, of course, as I predicted in my book, cannot rely on contractual necessity. They need consent if they want to collect data for personalized marketing. Is there hope in marketing? Think about tobacco and oil? Probably not. We can think about how can we design technology, but my conclusion basically in the book is that law will not do the trick. We need legislation to make a framework, but what we need to deal with these issues is that we need to have awareness. We need to have conversation with each other about what's going on. We have to find better stories, and then we have to be conscious and deliberate on how we use technology. Okay, I did the last slide. So there we go. Okay. Any reflections, comments, questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, first of all, for this really inspiring talk. I just went through the difficult process of negotiating with my kids about them getting a smartphone. And they're tweens. And it was really, I sort of regret the decision we made already, but it was really challenging in terms of like finding the right solution because you don't want them to become social outcasts, right? At the same time, we worry about them becoming wired, kind of mentally connected to the device. And so I think the middle ground we found is just to get them a dumb phone for the time being, right? You can only speak on a phone and text, and they quickly sort of...
And if anybody don't know what it is, I have one here. I can show you. Yeah.
So anyways, but it's a slippery slope. And, because you said you wanted to talk about strategies. I agree with you that law can do everything, right? And it's about education and creating awareness. But it's so subtle in many ways, right? Like, to unearth, the many subtle ways in which we're manipulated by technology, that requires lawmakers to require people who control the technology to force that, right? Yeah. Anyways, I agree with you. You need to use many different techniques to create that awareness. And address it, but I don't know. I go back and forth. Sometimes I'm like, I throw my hands up and say it's hopeless. And other times I'm inspired to try to, for myself and especially for my kids, of course. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know if there's a question.
No, it's wonderful because when I get back to Denmark, I actually have to go and give a presentation at my kids' school about this very subject. So, but I haven't formed my complete opinion on it. But one thing that makes a difference, so cigarettes, we can all agree that they should be prohibited in schools, right? We don't smoke here. Probably 30 years ago, it would be normal to smoke in a room like this. It was in Denmark, okay? But there's very little good to say about cigarettes. But there's a lot of good things to say about technology. That's why I started off by saying, I'm pro-technology. The smartphone can do a lot of things, and that is why we can't just prohibit it. And that is why we get into that dilemma of, how to deal with it. And I think, I'm struggling. I have my kind kids up here. So we're struggling with the same issues. When should you have a smartphone? What should we do with it? How much should we restrict it? But they will learn how to use the technology. What they will not learn later in life is social interactions. So I think as long as children get an opportunity to be with other kids and other people, and develop social skills, which is extraordinarily important. It's not screen per se that is a problem. So there is some research that says that children who play by themselves are worse off. They're in worse mood. But children who play with other people online, they are actually feeling better. than those that are playing by themselves. So computer games are, very good for developing things. I mean, we should just understand that the way they are designed is to be as addictive as possible, and we should try to steer away from that. So, I mean, I don't have the answer. So I think one should think about some rules. I mean, for our, we don't have screens, or we only have screens in the weekends. And during the work days, we don't have it. Because it's a disaster when you try to take them away. Because it's addictive, trying to take the cigarettes away from the kids. Don't do that, right? But of course we should. So we should think about it. What are they doing, and try to understand it. So there's a lot of focus on digital literacy. And I think we should just focus on literacy, because that is what is really important here. So I don't know if I'm answering you, but just understand how technology, if you can educate people and children to understand how technology is using us. That's why I like Neil Postman's quote so much. How is technology using us? And we should also, of course, when we make our structure, so we shouldn't make it mandatory to be on any social media to go through a university career or go to school and so on. So if somebody is at a school where they say, oh, we just put the assignments out on Facebook, ask them to not do that. In the book, I talk about politicians. All the politicians that are saying, oh, we should do something about Facebook and big tech and all that. How much money are they spending on advertising? To support that business model. So we should do something. I mean, we cannot just prohibit it. So, yeah.
So I agree. We should do something. I'm curious where your thoughts lie on who and how, because it's a large global issue, right? It's not one country versus another or whatever. But I look at it in the U.S. and I'm like, well, who would start that? How does that get started, right? From the Facebook idea of even kids who are looking for, dorm roommates, they get told to go to sign up for Facebook. They don't have a Facebook account. They're just getting more people to Facebook.
And we need people to rebel against it. I mean, I've talked to children or parents whose children are given back the smartphone. It's disturbing me too much. So there is hope. I've talked to some students. I've run 2 courses on 2 different universities and based on the book where I'm asking the students what to do. One of the better solutions is, when they're meeting out to drink beers in the weekend or, every day, whenever they do it, they will stack their phones. And the first to pick up their phone will take the bill. And that's a brilliant strategy to create awareness of what's going on. And I think we have to start from below, because big tech is not going to help us. They are struggling. So the decision I mentioned with Meta before, with Facebook and Instagram, it is being appealed. They are not, we think it's wrong and we will go to court with it and so on. So they will not help us because they have all the economic incentives. And also to be clear, profit maximization is a good thing. I mean, I'm not against markets, I'm not against technology. But there is a limit when you're trying to infringe on human dignity, which is the idea of what I've written about. So we have to find strategies, and we have to talk to friends of, just like we are talking about now, talk about it in the school, try to understand what is the cost, what can we do about it. In terms of addiction, so if you're an alcoholic, in psychology we speak about coping strategies. So what can you do to cope with it? You can start by not buying alcohol. The problem with the smartphone is that it does a lot of things for you. So you can't just get it away, unless you get a dumb phone, as I have. I haven't had a smartphone yet, and I don't intend to have one. And I pay another price, but that's the price I pay for doing that. I'm not telling it's the right thing for you to do, but so think about that. But that is one of the problems. Talking about addictions, by the way, so the studies been done in mice or rats or whatever that shows that you could make them dependent on the thing you get up your nose, right? Cocaine, yeah. And what the interesting part about that study, so you can make them addicted, no surprise. But if you keep them off 1 year and you start giving them again, instantly, their brain is altered. So they react in the same way. So they're permanently damaged. So this huge social experiment we have is actually also modifying the brains of our children and ourselves, because we are all addicted. And I think that's a good way to think about it and discuss. But if you talk to people, talk with them about their French use, because it's very difficult to reflect on what you do yourself. Yeah.
I first want to apologize for being late.
Oh, no worries.
It's a long story, but and I thought we were going at 1:52, so.
Right. I don't know how we're doing with time.
No, we have until 1:50, but
Okay.
we can wrap up anytime.
Yeah.
And so I came in late, obviously. I'm just apologizing for coming in late. And so I think I understand what you were presenting as far as choice architecture. And I just wanted to like lob some at you and get your opinion on this. And so as I just found it fascinating as you were going through your presentation. That was very well put together, by the way. And you were explaining choice architecture, and I couldn't help but so in my mind, I was drawing parallels and associations to systemic oppression. It's systemic oppression. Just overall, and there's many different forms and many different parts of systemic oppression. And I was just thinking about a conversation I had with a professor on this university who works in the Center for Asia, and we were talking about how socioeconomics affects like a person's lifespan and aging and how gracefully a person ages. So I just wanted your opinion that do you think that what you're educating about choice architecture in relation to social media and usage and getting a consumer to feel compelled to consume something or buy something or check a box, do you think that's really, how can I say this? I was trying to listen to you, like practice active listening while I formed this question in my mind. Do you think that that's a product of what's been going on in this country as far as systemic, like creating, there are certain neighborhoods that are impoverished. So you go in these neighborhoods, you're not going to find any whole food markets. You're going to find liquor stores. You're not going to, the schools are underfunded. You're not going to find, there's going to be a lack of resources and jobs overall. So do you think, so I guess my question without going off on a tangent and taking up all your time, because you're the presenter, I just wanted to throw that, do you think that there's a connection there? Is that like a product of what's always been in relation to systemic oppression and just trying to influence people to behave in a certain way?
I think it will answer in a different way. So in 2018, Facebook changed the algorithm. Some of you might have heard about it. So what they wanted to achieve is what they call time well spent and trying to optimize for meaningful interactions. So that is what they optimized for. And I wouldn't say Facebook is bad, Mark Zuckerberg is bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there are some unexpected, unanticipated consequences of these models where you're optimizing for you're optimizing for profit. And as I started, I was saying when you're optimizing for products, you want to have more users, more time from each user, and more data. And if you optimize for that, we realized that if you have something positive to say, that doesn't spread as fast as if you say something negative. So if you say something negative, it will spread faster. And that is why Facebook has made the world more aggressive, especially in this country. So we had Frances Haugen coming out, and she just came out in time for her to be in my book as well. So what is interesting about the revelations of Frances Haugen is not really that we had more conflict spurred by the algorithm, but that Facebook knew all about it and didn't do anything about it. They knew about Instagram making young girls feel worse about themselves, and they're not doing anything about it. And I'm pretty sure that if you use these algorithms, they will amplify some of the structures, if that's how I understand your question, that we already have, as long as it becomes profitable. So I think that what you're talking about, the systems there, they're usually a consequence of what is profitable and what is not profitable. And we have that online, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask,
Jan, sorry to break in. This is Susan from LST, and there's a number of good questions from our remote audience, if you'd like to take any of those.
Yes.
go ahead with the remote.
I'll go ahead. I can't see anything remote, so just anybody.
I'll read out one. So,
Okay.
where digital marketing is of course important, have you thought about the amount of sensors that are coming to our daily lives, measuring our biometrics, heart rates, brain waves, and the user-centric data ecosystem where data is collected to private data clouds and wallets, and new types, applications, and personal AI tools that are actually running on the user side? Could this human-centric model offer a little bit more hope for society?
Yes, I would agree that there's definitely hope in this, but I think the fundamental question when we're talking about data-driven marketing is whether it's necessary. So when we talk about the proportionality principle in the European Union, one of the questions you ask yourself, if you want to ask whether what we're doing is proportionate, you would ask the question, are there alternatives? And when it comes to marketing, you have what we call contextual marketing. If you search for something, you get marketing related to that. If you're part of a group, you get marketing related to that. And we actually have DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine alternative to Google, that is profitable and been that for about almost 10 years, only using contextual advertising and not using our data. So I think that is the first question when it comes to all the ways we can be empowered with our data. The first question we should ask ourselves is whether we should actually pay with our data. Because as I said, especially in Europe, it's a fundamental right. Can you pay with your privacy? Can you pay with your dignity? Can you pay with your liver? There are limits. So how should it be possible to pay with that? That's the first question. The second question I have is all these technologies, because I have a piece of it in the book as well, that we will implement AI in different settings because it gives us something. So we have, probably most of you have heard about ChatGPT and tried to use it. It's brilliant, it's fantastic what it can do. It has its flaws, but it's brilliant. But again, we should ask the question, what is the cost? What is the cost of students not being able to write anything by themselves, right? Because they can just use the chat robot. So they optimize for how to make a query in a machine. That is what they're optimizing for. You know, is that a useful skill? Again, we talked about the GPS before. It has a price that we use the GPS because our spatial understanding becomes worse. You know, do we need that? You know, what happens? I talked to a colleague at Berkeley yesterday. We talked about, you know, what if we have an outage? Don't have electricity. How long can we live without electricity? I write in one of the books many years ago, you know, just imagine we wouldn't have the internet for, you know, just a short period, like a month, right? A short period. No internet for 1 month. What would society look like? So we should think about the dependencies we are creating through the technology, especially AI, which we might implement because it augments our reality. And I speak about a baited reality, so it may actually make our reality worse off. Sorry, you have more questions. Let's take yours.
And then we'll go back to that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I connected with what the gentleman said because businesses are making unavailable their services unless you agree to access their services through your smartphone. An example is the airlines, for example. You really can't function with scheduling and checking in and all of that without going through your computer or smartphone. I mean, it isn't like there's an American Airlines office that you can walk into and say, yes, I want to check in now. So I think that's analogous to the ghetto scenario where there used to be a real grocery store and now it's gone forever and there's a food desert. These things are being taken away from us and we don't have an alternative. We are coerced into going through the lengthy cookie policy and all the rest of it in order to access basic services of businesses otherwise unavailable. So I think there is a deprivation that's been created.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So the question we should ask ourselves when we are automating things, that is, you know, who benefits from it and who pays the price? right? So I don't have a smartphone, for instance. I pay the price once in a while, but I have a choice. I could buy a smartphone. You have other people who would not be able to afford it, or for other reasons are not able, elderly people and so on, who cannot use the technology. So again, we need conversations about, in terms of this, who pays the price of this automation and who reaps the benefit.
So one question from Kayleen online. She says, thanks, Jan. Of course, education and awareness is important, and consumers do need to self-protect. However, where consumer protection law and privacy law to a certain extent should be acting is at the pointy end, i.e. where consumers cannot protect themselves, i.e. those with social, economic, and cognitive vulnerabilities that mean that they cannot protect themselves and their attention. Transparency is not enough, as it will not be protective. In Australia, we are now considering the regulation of dark patterns with vulnerable consumers in mind. What would you suggest as the main things that we should regulate?
Okay, so all the things I talked about here, I think we should regulate it. But one of the points I make in the book is, at least from an EU perspective, we can actually apply the legislation we have already. So the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive and the General Data Protection Regulation in conjunction provides pretty good safety. And we can see that with the judgments and decisions I've mentioned throughout. So they are capable of dealing with these issues. What we need to do, and that is actually the main purpose why I wrote the book, that is to inform judges about what is technology, what is psychology in this, how sophisticated it is. So I had the model of information asymmetry. We need to understand how skewed that information asymmetry is. I mean, it's not. I actually had the pleasure of reading a few books on magic. So magic is basically a matter of misleading people's attention and giving people the idea of having a free choice. That is the two main rules of doing magic. And it's all there. You can read it in books, but people don't do it. And the same with psychology of marketing. Everybody can read it. Psychology of choice architecture. Everybody can read it. We just don't do it. So I think the first thing we have to do is understand that it is not only vulnerable consumers, so to speak, but we are all vulnerable. We are all vulnerable to what is going on. And the asymmetry has just been skewed to a level where it's not fair anymore. And if you cannot convince the judges about that they should take that into account, I think we should change the general rules rather than trying to protect particular vulnerable groups in this, as we have done in the DSA, which is fine, but I think what is most important is that we try to regulate that for all users, because it is not fair as it is now. So, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the GDPR's right to an explanation and how that is implemented in practice?
Which explanation?
To an explanation for how data.
Oh, so the transparency requirements.
How decisions in automated
decisions, Article 22. Yeah. I don't know if what it says in the principle. We don't have, to my knowledge, we don't have any case law on it. How to do it. But you have to understand the significance and envisage consequences. That is what is said in the text. So that's what I had on one of the slides as well. So. It's difficult. Transparency is difficult. So my answer will be that what we have to discuss is there an extent to which where you can't explain it, where things become so complex that you can't meaningfully explain it? Or said in another word, if you can't explain it, just don't do it. Could that be a principle? Again, we're talking about what the Court of Justice should do in future law. But we have to ask that question. Should you be able to do everything as long as you put up a long text? How much can you expect? How much time and cognitive power can you expect people to use to try to understand this? Contact a lawyer, you could explain it to me, should I say yes or no to this app? It's not going to happen. So we have to have a pretty good baseline of protection for all consumers.
Okay. Earlier, any more questions in the room?
Hi. I have a question kind of like relating back to the last question. So around like informed consent and like transparency. So with these privacy regulations, this is new requirements on tech companies to provide transparency and enough info for users to make informed decisions. So I think with that comes like this industry standard of like articles and blog posts, and like some of these like written communications have like graphics and very user-friendly icons. Like, how do you suggest maybe judges or like tech companies measure like the efficacy of these like solutions? Because some of the articles are like really long and kind of lengthy, but there's also like kind of gamey also like blog posts and stuff which is private privacy practices.
Well, in general, we are challenged by an attention span that is shrinking, right? So you probably experience that. I mean, we experience with students even, and oh, can we get a video of your presentation? That would be great because you don't want to read a book and so on. That is scary, So, so one guy, another quote, you don't have to burn books if people don't read them, right? And that is what we're moving towards, a situation where people are not reading books. That's dangerous to society. But to answer your question, I think a lot of organizations can do a lot to inform, but we're still back to, to which extent should you actually be able to do what you're doing? And then I had another response to you that have just slipped my mind, or maybe come back to. Yeah.
I'm actually a contrarian, so I might be wrong. I'm not sure, because reality for me is a bit different. Because 10 years ago, I grew up with internet, not just social media, and there was Google in front of me. The thing that I knew is what I type in Google would show me. So at the same time, I have access to porn, but at the same time, I have access to all the knowledge. So eventually, it depends on me if I want what I want to search. That doesn't mean that I'm spending most of my time watching pornography, or I'm spending most of my time searching for knowledge. So I'm actually really confused, because what I believe is data that's been given to the website or the companies are actually being used to make those websites better for the people who uses it. So please.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said in the beginning, technology is neither good nor bad. Okay, so the idea of you getting access to all information, and I think Wikipedia is the only website left that really delivers on the promise that the internet was in the old days, where you get all the information. And I'm not against people getting access to information. I'm all for it. What I'm questioning is whether you should have a marketing model that is infringing on your privacy by surveilling you and manipulating you. That is what I'm questioning, not all the other things. And I remember my second answer to you. So what I want lawyers to understand and judges to understand is that information, I have a model in the book, but information is the knowledge, data that is being conveyed, that has to be translated, disseminated, decoded again, and then understood at the end. So we have information, we have communication, how you say things. So when I stand here in a room, the way I'm working with my hands and so on has a huge importance on how I'm conveying the things that I'm saying. So we need to understand that how you are framing things, the storytelling you are using is highly influential. And if you look at how businesses are doing that, just the mere fact that they say, we do that to improve your experience. Who are not for an improved experience on a website, right? But that's not what it's about. So the first thing we could ask when we're talking about transparency is to understand how it affects individuals, how they understand it, and try to ask businesses to be more clear about what is really going on. What is it you're paying with? You're not paying with your data, and that is why I argue that that is a misleading way of saying it, because, oh, I'm the clever one. I can pay with my data here and there and so on, and I get all these free services. But when we talk about you're paying with your agency and you're paying with your attention, that's a scarce resource. And that is much more important to pay with. Yeah.
Joe, was there another question there?
Oh, you could ask the question first.
All right, there's two more Zoom questions. Maybe I'll ask them together. You can answer them both together, and then we'll go to you, and then we have to wrap up.
Right.
We have 5 minutes for all of that. So Pega Online is asking, saying some industry as opposed to social media, some industries are losing business and trying to micro-target their marketing. Some of these industries we actually want to encourage, for example, universities that are seeing fewer applicants or getting people vaccinated. It's difficult to talk about manipulation in this context when the end goal is seen as something good. So the ends sometimes appear to justify the means. Do you have any thoughts on that? So that's the first question. The other one's from Peter, where he says, do you see any alternate business models starting to emerge that will be more privacy friendly? So
yes. Okay. So basically, if you do something for good, that is the whole Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler idea of nudging. Right? So nudging is meant as small nudges to make people do things that are good for them.
Right.
Originally, it was called libertarian paternalism, because it is paternalism. It is pushing people towards something. So the first thing we have to agree on is, is vaccination good or bad? I'm all for vaccination, but I know other people's aren't. So what is good for people is difficult to understand. So what we should try to do is to build system, and that is all the idea of nudge, build systems that makes it easy for individuals to follow their goals, values, and preferences, right? To understand that. So, I think that would be my answer. So that is the idea of nudging. And other business models, I think DuckDuckGo, as I mentioned, contextual advertising. You can do that. There is a guy called Huang. He has written, from Oxford, written a brilliant book on the data marketing bubble. So his argument is that we don't have research that shows that this hyper-targeted advertising is actually effective. And some of the companies that rely on it are making most of the research to make it look good. But it is actually questionable whether it is as good and effective as these companies promise the advertisers. So that could again be an argument for going to the less privacy infringing model of just having contextual advertising. I'm not against advertising. That's great, and it's transparent, and you can fund things and so on. And I'm sure that Meta and Facebook and all those companies, they will have pretty good businesses, even with contextual advertising. Not as good as it is now, but much more healthy for society.
Want to ask the final question?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for this lecture. It's really intriguing. I have a couple questions, or one question actually, because I don't have a lot of legal background, and my background's in engineering, but I happen to work on litigation cases, especially for ad tech. And what I found, at least in some cases, that it was hard to litigate against some companies because the public is really against using cookies and et cetera. But I found a lot of companies have found loopholes in tracking data.
I found what?
Loopholes
Yeah.
in tracking data. So instead of storing data, they feed the data instantaneously to an algorithm, and that happens to bypass a lot of legislature already written. So my question is have you, from experience or through history, seen how legislature can transform as technology changes to bypass previously written legislature?
There is this saying in technology law that technology is always law is always behind technology, which I think it has to be. I think what is going wrong in the EU is that we're trying to regulate something that is not there. So there are actually a number of pieces of legislation that is coming out now. Some of them have been adopted, some of them are in the pipeline, that are trying to foresee the future. We have the AI Act and so on. We're trying to regulate something that we don't really know we don't know what the problems is. And I think, and I said that in the beginning with the DSA, I think that might be more dangerous to do that because you create uncertainty, especially in areas where we have legislation in the works. So we have the GDPR, for instance, in our context, that protects the privacy and personal data of individuals. We have the marketing that deals with the economic interests of consumers. We have product safety, which is a huge area. We haven't touched on that. But that will be growing, we have to understand how product safety can be used. Can you say that Google and Facebook is a safe product? Right? Things like that. So when we have legislation, I mean, we should try to interpret that, and the courts are pretty good at actually interpreting law, I think, especially in the European Union, and I think also in the US, to adapt legislation to new circumstances. And if we try to regulate particular technologies, particular business models, it gets pretty muddy, because then you create the possibility of making loopholes. So the broader the legislation, with clear incentives of what is it we want to achieve, I think that's much better than trying to make new legislation that is trying to stop things, because then you will open up new things.
Right, well, great. Well, let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Professor Trzaskowski, and thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thank you all for coming. And yeah, please join me in thanking our speakers.